Hey everybody, welcome back to Pro AV. Today I am your host, Ben Thomas. One of the things that I love to do on this show is spotlight people, organizations, industries, maybe that don't quite always get the credit that they deserve. And this episode is one of those episodes, right, where we're talking about obstruction lighting. Why do you think that's relevant in a Pro AV community, in a broadcast community? That's what we're going to find out today. So I brought on somebody who's much smarter than me. That's Jim Jacoby, president over at TWR Lighting. Jim, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for the time, Ben.
Well, look, Jim, you and I initially met through the NAB community, and I was transparently a little bit surprised to see somebody like you guys being a part of that community because, normally when you think obstruction lighting, maybe it's just on top of buildings, those random light bulbs on top of cell towers. But there's actually a massive impact that you guys have on not only the broadcast, but the telecom industry and the infrastructure industry as a whole. So why would you say obstruction lighting is so important to our industries right now?
Yeah, because I think if you think about it in depth, any industry that's transmitting using towers, through a signal, whether it's broadcast, telecommunication, or any structure that's over, say, 200 feet in the air, they're all required to provide some type of visual display to inbound aircraft that there's an obstruction in their way, and that's the way they alert them. So your options are really to paint it to a certain color, and certainly you don't want to paint buildings that color, or you can light them up. And if you choose to paint, you've got a maintenance issue, you've got a high cost issue, and a repetitive issue of having to do that. Versus the way they started out by putting lights up there to actually provide that visual, notification to someone that, hey, there's something impeding my way through there, and I need to avoid it.
Well, look, it seems pretty practical in principle, and honestly, I love that. But one of the questions that at least came to my mind as soon as I kind of had a chance to meet you guys was, what does the buying cycle look like, right? Who owns the towers? Who's responsible for the compliance and the maintenance of all that? What does the normal buying channel and the buying cycle look like for obstruction lighting?
Yeah, so from a compliance standpoint, anyone who owns it or is putting it up for, let's say, installing it, right? They've got a compliance to the FAA, and the FAA has strict requirements that we can get into if you want. But they start with any structure over 200 feet has to be lit to a certain amount. It has to have a light spread of X amount. It has to have a beam capacity in terms of how far it goes out by X amount, and all that's predicated based on the height of the system it's being installed on, right? So then in terms of ownership, when I first joined the organization, I kind of thought, well, AT&T or Verizon has got to be our largest customer, right? Because they're the ones who have all these cell towers out there. But in reality, they own a small percentage of their own towers, right? Probably less than 10% of the towers that they're employing. And in reality, the telecommunication industry, there is a separate community of tower owners who own those towers and allow other broadcasters, whether it's a broadcast tower for NBC or whether it's, for an AT&T, telecommunication tower, to be on their tower and broadcasting and renting through the tower that they own, the tower that they maintain, and everything else that goes with it.
Well, look, and if, your city is anything like us here in Dallas, these towers are popping up all the time, right? And a lot of that is the demand for 5G coverage, cellular connectivity, not only in major metropolitan areas, but also rural applications as well. From you talked about an ownership conversation there. What's the most important thing to think about as somebody is, building and buying some of this land? How early in that process does obstruction lighting actually come into play?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So if you think about like wind turbines, right? So they're putting those wind turbines out in farm area, right? So initially the FAA was saying, well, you only need to have X capacity of those wind turbines covered in light. So it's usually around 60 to 80%. But as they get closer to areas of population as well as airports, well, now you need to have more of those units lit because at that point you've got lower flying aircraft versus, planes that are up at 30,000 feet that really don't need to be worried about something that's, 700-800 feet off the ground. So as you get closer to population, or in our cases, population expands, right? They add more people, they add more density of airports to cover those people. And that then requires, the lighting aspect to come into play.
Well, look, I think a lot of times people just associate the really tall red blinking light as being really maybe the only type of obstruction lighting, right? That's relevant. But we had a chance to talk a little bit before the show. There's so many different types, right? Whether it's strobe, whether it's the normal red blinking light. But what are some of the technological advancements that you're seeing right now in the industry?
Yeah. So when TWR started, I mean, they came out with an incandescent bulb, right? So they had something that probably needed to be changed periodically throughout the year. It wasn't something that lasted very long, and it didn't put out much of a display. It then went to the xenon strobe. They changed to that, which had a stronger in terms of density of light stream, and also had less maintenance. And now you're into the LED lights. So technology on the lighting side has changed. You're talking over 40 years. It's changed a little bit and gotten a lot better to where now we've got light systems that are out there that could probably last anywhere from 15 to 18 years. You don't have to change anything, and as long as you built them correctly, you've allowed moisture and anything to not seep into the circuit boards. So at that point, the system should be usable for that 15 to 20 year period, right? So now we're seeing technology change in another aspect, which is the demand for data, right? So instead of just having a red light or a white light or a dual light, what else can that light system do for us that's up on top of the tower? Can it transmit data? Can it report back in terms of what it's doing in terms of operating, or if it gets system failures, or is it a GPS tied to it, or do we have a radar system in it? In the future, I could see these systems actually reporting out, wind and as well as, weather for the aircraft themselves, to give them immediate alerts of what they're seeing or experiencing at those levels, similar to what, the FAA is doing now when the pilots call in and ask about it. But these are reports that could be just being, pulsated out through the system itself.
Well, and I love that you bring that up too, right? Because I think a lot of times people will just associate the light being its own thing, right? But when you start talking about being able to analyze weather patterns and wind speeds, obviously that has application for the airplanes and the airport traffic side of it. But that's also important for the broadcaster, the telecom company, to know as well, right? Because in different weather patterns, your signal is going to travel different lengths and distances, things like that. Are you seeing broadcasters and telecom companies adopt technologies like that through the lighting fixtures?
I think it's something that's coming about. What we're seeing now is that they're tying in, certain companies that provide those heavy-duty radar stations that also provide that feedback. But we're working with companies now to figure out a way to integrate both within ours and have a smaller system that can actually provide that localized information, let's call it, within that area of where it's up, right? Now, do they need one in a wind farm? Would they need one in every one of those turbines? Of course not. But a tower that is a telecommunication tower or broadcast tower, there's only one of them in a set area of, span. So at that point, they probably need one in each one of those that go up.
Well, Jim, look, I talked about us meeting initially through the NAB community. You guys will be out at NAB this year. What's your message to the community, and maybe what are some of the things you guys are looking to show off?
Yeah, so we're really excited to attend NAB. I'll actually be there. We're launching what we call a high intensity system. It's our North Star. So right now we provide medium range lights, which would probably be for anything in the 200 to 700 foot height. When you think about your broadcast towers, those are the ones that are running 700 feet and above. And in those, the FAA requires what they call a high intensity lighting system. These are much more, there's a lot more that goes into those in terms of the light span and how far they have to get out there, because obviously they're higher up in the height wise. So at that point, they have a better chance of being obstruction to inbound aircraft. So we're getting excited that we're going to have a prototype ready to launch at the site, and we'll be displaying it at the show. It will be the finished version. Obviously, we've got a lot more work to do, and we hope to have everything ready by the end of the year. But we're excited that we're at least going to have something initially to show out to the broadcast community.
Well, Jim, it's funny you bring up, the FAA. This is maybe one of the few times that the FAA and the FCC find a way to kind of work together. But last question here, what are some of the things on the horizon for the industry, maybe the next 5-10 years that you're most excited about?
Probably the most excited about would be, that I think that when these lights are going to become what I mentioned earlier, right? They're going to be smarter in what they do and what they provide. They're going to continue to advance. I don't know if we'll see a lot more advancements, from the LED in terms of the capability of the light. I just think that the system itself will get it more advanced in terms of the information it can report out, and the data that it can collect and provide to whether it's a local or national community in terms of what it's transmitting. So I see the technology of the light itself improving in that aspect, and the companies that are willing to embrace that and work on it are the ones that are, really going to meet that demand when it comes about. I mean, you look at 5G right now and everyone's talking about it, but there's very little 5G out there, right? So I think 4G is probably going to be around for at least another 10 years. And then as 5G demand increases, as well as the costs come down for those 5G modems, I think that's when you'll start to see that transition. I think the data communication in the lighting system itself will follow that same pattern. It may not be next year, but I think, when you're looking 3 to 5 years out, you'll start to see a lot of this technology embedding itself in the light itself.
Well, Jim, look, we're excited to see the future of the technology, and I appreciate you coming on the show today because transparently, I had a lot of questions and was really fired up to learn a lot more, not only about the work that you guys are doing, but really the industry as a whole, because it's one of the places that those of us who are more inclined on the technological and maybe the button-pushing side really don't get to interact with much. So I appreciate you coming on today and teaching us a little bit more about the connectivity side of the broadcast world.
No, I certainly appreciate your time. I mean, it's a very interesting industry, something I didn't know a lot about before I joined, but every day is a learning curve for me, and that in terms of what they do and the services that we provide, it's really interesting.
Well, Jim, we appreciate you coming on. Jim Jacoby, president of TWR Lighting, really doing some great stuff in the industry. Look forward to seeing you out at NAB this year and making some connections.
Yeah, looking forward to it as well. We'll see you then, man.
Well, and we appreciate you guys tuning in as well. If you have a topic that you'd like us to cover that you might not know as much about, we always love suggestions. So if there's anything you'd like to send over, you can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. Send me an email at ben.thomas@marketscale.com. We'll make sure to cover it. But we appreciate you. Tune in next time.